Okay guys, in this video we are going to talk about the ultimate bus build engine builds. We're going to start with the lowest cost on up to the highest cost. And this is all going to depend on what parts you have laying around. So if you have to go to all new parts, you might as well just go right to the portion at the end where I'm going to talk about the most expensive one, because it ain't going to be cheap. But if you have a variety of engine parts around, you could go with the lower cost base engine. So for instance, I have a 69 crankshaft for, a 1600 that's in great shape, and I can run that, and I've got some decent rods that are original that I'm not going to go out and buy brand new ones. So if I'm going to take this down and have it machined, I'm going to have rebuilt rods. I'm going to go to option 2, guys. I'm not going to bother getting this one machined, because the cost of getting this machined and the cost of getting those rods machined, I'm near the next best option, which is counterweighted crank and a larger stroke. So if you're going budget, you got a crankshaft that's in good shape, you got some rods that are in good shape, maybe all you have is a single relief case. This is your budget build. But let's say you have all of those things. You have a good crankshaft, you have a good case that is single relief, you've got a good line bore on that case, or you've had it done. That's where you want to start. And you want to get a decent amount of power for the least amount of money. And so what you can do is do a 1600. Now guys will fight me on this, and the camshafts that come in Volkswagens were designed for two things. In the early years, they were designed to keep the RPMs down, because the earlier engines, say the 40 horse and even the early 1500s, some of them had 17 millimeter oil pumps. And a 17 millimeter oil pump, really the RPM limit is somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 RPMs. And you run more RPMs than that, you're going to starve it for oil, and your engine will fail very quickly. Now the reason that didn't happen with the old Volkswagen engines is the old 40 horse, with the gearing that was in the car and everything was set up so that even if you were floored for long periods of time, you would never get past that 4,000 RPMs unless you're going downhill. And guys did that, of course, and seized their engines. So they started with the 21 millimeter oil pump, which was still a little shy on the amount of oil that you need going through your engine. So if you look at the later models, the dual relief cases, they came with 26 millimeter, which was a really good happy medium. So over the years, they got better and better. But the engines always had a really crappy duration on the cams. So in the early years, they were preventing them from having higher RPMs. In the later years, it was more emissions. So putting a performance camshaft in today makes all the sense in the world. It's 100% the best way to get more power out of any size engine. Now, in addition to doing that, you go to the 26 millimeter oil pump. Now you've corrected the whole engineering thing. And people go, well, the Volkswagen engineers always made the best stuff. Well, again, VW was the people's car. It was the cheap car. Porsche was the more expensive line of the same thing. Your 356s had, and the 912s had the counterweighted cranks. So there's no reason you can't upgrade the engineering of your Volkswagen to what they used in the Porsches, which were longer lasting engines, handled RPMs better, and more RPMs is your friend if you want horsepower and torque. Of course, remember, torque at a higher RPM is going to bring you horsepower, okay? So it's not as usable in a bus. The best, most usable power is what you get down low in a bus. So option 2 of going bigger with your engine is the easiest way to get more torque. Option 1, 1600 performance cam. Ones I like for 1600 are about somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 or 400 lift and about 265 to 270, somewhere in the 270s duration, okay, for 1600. And it may give you a little bit of a rough idle, but it won't be that bad. It's totally tolerable. But it's going to give you that mid-range torque. It doesn't really change the idle that much at all if you go with something in the 400 range. So cams like the Scat C25 for if you're not going to run ratio rockers. If you're going to run ratio rockers, you can go with the Scat C20. They also have stock cams. You can go down and have them reground to what they call a 100 or 110, but they're actually Scat. The 100 is actually, I've measured, was similar to the Scat C20. The 110 is similar to the Scat C25, just so you know. When they work fine, give you more horsepower than the stock cam. It gives you better RPMs in the freeway. And when you have the 26 millimeter oil pump, that's going to help you. Or even if you go with a 30, some guys go with 30s because they're full flowing and stuff like that. But if you go to 26 will actually handle full flow. It just depends on the opinion. There's a lot of opinions on that. Some guys go, oh yeah, you need the 30. It depends on how many RPMs you're running, guys. That's what it comes down to. If you're staying under 6, you're probably fine. Now the other thing is if you have single port heads, and that's all you have, it's not going to give you more torque to go with single port than go with dual port. It doesn't give you more torque, okay? It's just better torque, I'm going to say. It doesn't give you more horsepower or torque to go with single port. Single port, just going to limit your RPMs, okay? And because it limits your RPMs, your horsepower and torque is going to be down lower. So, okay, some guys will say that's going to give you more torque. It's not really. If you have more air and fuel in there at a lower RPM and it's able to fire it, you're going to have more torque even with dual port heads, believe it or not. So if you're starved on your budget and all you have is single ports, I mean, don't go out and run out and buy a set of single ports thinking you're going to have more torque, because that's just not going to happen. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for running single port heads. One of them is you want the look of the solid intake manifold. Maybe you want that whole look, and that's fine. That's a good reason, but don't think, I'm going to get more torque because I'm going single port than I'm going to get with dual port. It's not going to happen. You get more torque with dual port actually than you can with single port. It's going to be at a little bit higher RPM, okay, but you will have a bigger torque number. And it gets into the argument of usable horsepower, usable torque. We're not going to go there. It is actually better still, even in a bus, to have dual port heads. But again, like sometimes you want the single port because, hey, you want the look of the single port engine. So we're going to talk about that first. So on your single port, major issue, pull the exhaust valves out and open up the exhaust ports. They are super, super, super restricted. And to get more RPMs out of that engine, you're going to need that exhaust to flow a little bit better. So you got to pull these out, and you'll have to clean up the port a little bit where it comes out of the valve and goes around the corner. You can't even get your pinky through there, so it's really, really small. You open it up to get so that your pinky fits through. That's about all you got to do. Heads will come alive. The other thing you have to do if you're going with performance cam is you have to have more compression than stock. The stock, I think, was 7.5 to 1. You got to take your engine up to 8.25. And people go, oh, it makes it run hot. Not necessarily, okay? And there's ways to correct that. It doesn't necessarily make it run that hot when you have more air and fuel in there and you have a performance cam. Let's say you put a stock cam in. Let's say you put a stock cam in and you give it more compression. Now you're probably going to run hot, okay? But if you have a performance cam in there with more air and fuel in there, then it's probably not going to run hot. And the other thing that I'm going to suggest, if you're going to go with a bus, you're going to put it in a bus, is to go with a doghouse cooler set. Even with a single relief case, I will put a doghouse on it because they do run a lot cooler. So you need the whole doghouse set up, okay? And with that, you also need the doghouse cooler, okay? And you need the doghouse, it's a little adapter, they call it. And then you're going to need the fan for the doghouse. The fan for the doghouse is bigger than the other fan, so that's an improvement as well. So you're going to have more air going through your heads, more air going through your cooling system. It's just going to run a lot cooler with that doghouse. So as long as your jetting is correct on your single port 1600, you can run nice and cool. You can build up a lot more horsepower by just giving a little more compression in the cam. That's the cheapest and easiest way to get more horsepower. Now, if you've got good dual port heads and your heads are small cc, like these here, if you can see, these are brand new OE heads, and they have about 60 cc's of combustion chamber. The factory was about 50. And so if you've got, usually they've been machined, so if you have stock heads and they're at like 47 cc's, then you're going to have to stay with a smaller engine. And this is kind of where you run into the threshold of pain. If you're going to buy brand new heads, it's better to go big. If you want more power, the bigger engine is going to give you that more torque. A larger engine gives you more torque. More stroke gives you more torque. So like a longer stroke, if you figure, is more leverage. It's like putting a longer bar on your breaker bar to break a nut bolt loose. It's the same principle with a longer stroke. Long strokes give you more torque. So you guys, it all starts with what you have in your parts pile. It all starts with what you have in your parts pile. If all you have is a single relief case and all you have is a single port heads, then you're probably going to be best off going with the 1600, unless you want to spend a little bit more money and go to the 1679. You can have the heads opened up and do that. It's another option you can do on a budget. It's going to cost a little bit more money for those pistons and cylinders, and you're going to have the heads opened up for 90.5, 92, and then you put that 88 thick wall cylinder in, which again, you're going to help your engine run a little bit cooler. So next, a little bit more money, you can go with the 88 thick walls with the stock crankshaft and go to 1679. You notice I didn't say anything about 87s. I don't like 87s. 87s are thin wall cylinders. They run hotter. So if one already has 87s in it, I'll put a set of rings on it and run them. Okay, but if I'm trying to be cheap. But if I'm going to go out and buy brand new stuff, I'm going to go to the 88 thick wall. And the 88 thick wall, what's nice about them is they slide into their 85.5 case opening here. So they're very, very thin where they go in the case. But where they go into the heads, they're super thick, so your actual cylinder is like near a quarter of an inch thick. So you have a really, really, really thick wall cylinder, and what that does is helps you dissipate the heat. And in your bus, that would be very helpful if you can spend that little bit of extra money. You look at the difference between price, though. 85.5s are the cheapest. You look at 88 thick walls, a little more money. So you have to pay more money there. You have to pay a little more money to have your heads redone, okay? And you really want to make sure that you get to that target ratio of about 8 1/4 to 1. That's the key thing. So it's 8 1/4 to 1, performance camshaft, and as big as you can afford to go. Okay, that's really the game. So like a lot of times people go, hey man, Mike, why did you build a 1904 instead of going to a 2021? That's a good question. because I had stock good heads. I had some old heads from the old head pile over there that I could have machined, and I have access to valve grinding equipment. So I had the heads redone, okay, and I could run that for that 1904. But if I ran it to a 2021, my compression ratio would probably be way too high unless I started putting massive amounts of shim and having all my fire down in the cylinder, okay, by having a huge deck height, okay. The deck height would be, say, 120 thousandths. That deck height is going to hurt me when it comes to detonation. It's not going to run as efficient as if I have all the fire in the head. The game is to get as much fire in the head as possible. If you can get the fire to happen in the head, your engine is going to run cooler. It's going to run more efficient. It's going to give you a better power for the engine size. This is all stuff that guys have learned in drag racing, and you can take that to your street car and it will help you as far as efficiency. I don't like to have more than 60 thousandths deck height. I'll go to 70 maybe. Try to stay away from doing that. I like to go to 60 max. I like to go even tighter than that. So you'll see me do things like step cutting my heads, these are step cut right here. If you see, I'm going to show up nice and close so you can see these step cuts. So I'll go with a step cut head, but I'll make sure that step clears my cylinder thickness, all right? So I want to make sure that my piston is clearing, that step doesn't interfere with my deck height for my piston. My piston is going to come up to this surface, not to here. You know what I mean? And I'll try and even put a tighter deck height than 60 thousandths. So I'll go to 40, 45, or 30, and I'll have a step on here that makes up for that difference, so that my piston to the head is still at 60 thousandths. Okay, I like my piston to the head have some distance, all right, because if you have rod stretch from RPMs, then you're going to hit the head if you don't have that clearance in there. You have to have the distance between your piston and your head has to be there. There's just a whole bunch of different ways to do it. You can do it by step cutting. You can do it by you can do it by deck height. You can do it by anything. There's deck height to cylinder. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. And why I like to do the next thing, which is build a stroker engine, is because I can manipulate all that stuff. Okay, when I build a 69, your deck height's going to be close to 60 thousandths almost every time. You can't run it tighter, and unless you take your cylinders down and have them decked, then you run into the whole reason. If you're going to do all that, you're spending enough money there that you're going to spend. You might as well just get the stroker crank and the counterweighted, because the counterweighted is going to be better than your stock non-counterweighted crank. So people go, well, Volkswagen engineers were smarter than all of us dummies that do stuff at home, and they put a non-counterweighted crank in. The reason they did that is because of budgets. It is cheaper to put a non-counterweighted crank in than it is to put a counterweighted crank in. All right. It was a cheaper manufacturing method. It was the people's car. It was a cheap car. When we do these kind of upgrades, we are taking it to the more expensive car, which is the Porsche. So that kind of combats that. And there's still going to be people that will argue that all the way to the grave. But all I know is this. When I get a counterweighted crank engine car, I feel it right away. The engine's smoother. It likes the RPMs better. It just feels way better. The power's more direct. There's just a lot of different things you'll notice when you go to counterweighted. So the next option is to go to a stroker engine. So if you've got a little more money, you're just like, man, you know what, Mike, I don't want to cheap out. I want to go to a stroker engine. Now, this is where engine size makes a difference. Okay, engine size makes a difference. you're going to need to weigh out what kind of exhaust system am I going to put on this, which almost always I would go to something performance because the stock exhausts are just very restricted. And you're going to be very limited because it could build up heat because you start to have everything running through that little tiny exhaust pipe. That's when you really need to take a look at things and start making it better. Only one I like the stock exhaust on is a 40 horse. 40 horse, even with the performance upgrades, builds up better torque with the stock exhaust. Everything else I put in an extractor or a merge system. Now if you go with the merge system, that is your best performance upgrade. But with a merge system, you run into issues where you don't get to run your heater boxes. That's going to give you the best performance. That's going to give you the least resistance going through the exhaust. It's going to give you the best flow. So at higher RPMs, it is going to sing and run better. It is going to give you, on the freeway, a nicer flow. Okay, so that's going to help your engine run cooler. Better flow, runs cooler. So this is something that I never really experimented with, is these heads right here. These are OE, okay? I like the performance upgraded big valve heads, okay, for bigger engines. But maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to run heater boxes. And so we built the 2021, and this was a little bit of a learning curve for me because, again, these bigger engines were super expensive in the 80s. So what we built most of the time was stock engines. Now it's just a couple hundred. I mean, it's really only $150 to $250 more to go stroker. It's really not that much more. So, I mean, if you're going all new, I mean, so if you're going with a reground crankshaft, and then you got a crankshaft that's 20/20, 30/30, really, come on. If you're going to do that, you spend a couple $100 and you go to a 4340 crank, okay, and you go to the AA Performance chromoly short rods, okay, which is the easiest way to do it. There's other ways to do it too. You can go to the 5.5 rods and B pistons, and you can do it that way if you want. You can go to the chromoly short rods, chromoly 5.5 rods, and B pistons. You want to do it, it's going to end up near the same. So guys will do it either way, and because they go, well, you get a better rod ratio. Well, that's true. But I like to just do it the simple way, which, I don't know. I'd like to do the 5.5 B pistons once and just to see how that works out. But like I said, it doesn't matter. You can do it either way and get the horsepower you want. And there's arguments on either end of it. I mean, longer rods are going to be better all the time. Okay, longer rods are better because your rod, when it's just a rod ratio, the rod angle when it pulls the piston, okay, it's a little bit better. Okay, but it's not that much difference. It's because Porsche engineers put a 5.352 rod in their engines, and we're talking about 5.325 rods. So you're talking about what, 26,000 or something crazy like that. It's like 20,000, something like that difference in rod. It's very little. Okay, and the Porsche engineers were fine with that rod ratio. They were fine with it. So I'm fine with them. Okay, I'll stick with the Porsche engineers. So I'm okay with running short rods. Some of you guys might say, hey, I'll run 5.5s. Like CB, they like to do 5.5s and Bs. Bs are, there's good things about Bs, or bad things about Bs. Bs are lighter, they're smaller, so you could do either way. Doesn't matter. Maybe you've got some good pistons you picked up at the swap, brand new ones, and they're A pistons. So do whatever you got. So now you can go to a 74 or a 76. I found the 76 is just as easy to build as a 74. I didn't see any difference in the difficulty. and you're talking about 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters of stroke. So you're talking about 1 millimeter this way, 1 millimeter that way. Not that much difference in stroke, not that much a difference in reciprocating weight. So the 76, and especially if you're able to run lower RPMs because you've geared it up a little bit more, and you're going to get better gas mileage because you've got your engine running at a lower RPM. So if you're able to combat it with tire size, bigger tires, or there's a lot of different ways to get that gear ratio better, you'll have a better result with a larger stroke engine. So that 76 went together really easy. And we ran these heads. So a lot of guys were like, hey, if you're going to go in the 2-liter range, you're going to need bigger valves. Well, this is what I really think we figured out doing that engine. The flow on these, even though they're smaller ports, now I opened up the ports on them, and they're smaller, they're stock valves, okay? The flow on these heads is good enough to run an 1 3/8 exhaust with the 2021. We had that engine has no problems with heat. It does not run hot. Okay, part of that maybe is because it's in like a Baja type thing, but I didn't see any issues when I ran it on the stand. When we ran it, I didn't think that thing ran hot at all. Now, when I built the 2007 with big valves, and I put these 1 3/8 exhaust on it, oh yeah, that sucker was hot as a pumpernickel. Okay, it was hot because the big valves need that larger exhaust. So if you go with 40, 35 valves, okay, in the big valves, you're going to need that merged exhaust, 1.5 inches, okay? 1 5/8 is for the big motors. 1.5 inches is for your smaller engines. Again, everything in this video is my opinion. You can take it or leave it. This isn't the Bible. It's just something to help you understand some of the stuff. So because of the flow of these heads, because they flow better, because they don't have, these don't have the bosses in them. They don't have, if you look down in there, they don't have the guide bosses, okay? And the guide bosses slow down and restrict the flow that are on the stock heads. So running these, I think you're okay with the 2021. Now, I don't know if I'd go any bigger. I've heard of guys doing that with bigger engines. A guy runs a 2007 with single port heads, but he runs a 120,000 stack height or something like that to be able to make it work. That's where I kind of go, no. So, but guys do it, and they're running them, and they don't have overheat issues. Okay, that's what we're looking for. But you lose the horsepower, the torque gain you lose from going bigger, and you kind of lose it with having that deck height. Okay, with using, those. It's just a slushy way to go. It's better if you go with dual port. You'll get more bang for your buck. So using these OE heads with the better flow, or even the AA ones. Now, this is kind of where you run into arguments, and some guys will say that they're having issues with the valve guide sliding out of those. I don't know about that. I think it really depends on how hot you're letting your engine get, how much stress you're putting it under, all that stuff. I think there's factors in that. So I'm not buying into that stuff, okay? I don't see a problem. And especially these OEs, I haven't heard of any types of problems with these. These ones only have the stock plug in them, and the AA ones have the longer reach ones, so they'll have a little more meat, so they don't crack as easily. So you can decide for yourself on that. And the AA ones, I think they're only 57 cc, and these ones we measured 60 on. So, there's problems and benefits. You make your decision. I'm just telling you. And like I said, if you're going to a 2021, you're going to need the biggest combustion chamber you can get. And the numbers came out really nice with the 2021 with this, because you came out with like 8.25. Was real easy to get. Didn't need to have to do really any extra machine work to the heads, and you just opened them up for the 94s, and that was it. And that thing sucker went right together. And it had in the 2021, what's nice about that is you got the 92 thick wall cylinders. So now you got 92 thick walls, and so you got super thick. They're like the 88s, okay, but you've got more stroke. So you've got this engine that's just a super torque powerhouse. And when I drove that car, I noticed right away, this is a bus motor. This thing would just pull a bus like nothing. It would just take it down the road really nice. And you could run heater boxes. So the reason we found this out, okay, because he had a specific exhaust for that truck that we put the 2021 in. Okay, it had a specific exhaust that we needed to keep on that car because we can't buy another one. We'd have to put something on it, but it wouldn't look right. Okay, so we wanted to keep that same exhaust. So, and the concern for me was, well, I'm going this big, I'm running that same exhaust. But then I talked to him. He's like, well, I had this with a 2180 with that same exhaust on it. So it worked. You know, it did work with engine 3/8 exhaust. So, yeah. A bigger engine can work, but you just don't want to go too big, you know, and that's the issue. So I think those guys running the 2007 with a single port were running engine 3/8 exhaust too. So it is possible to do. It's because we're running stock valves. But to keep it to run cool, we've got flow with our ports, because these ports, even though they're smaller, have really good flow. If you look at them, they just look like they'll work right. So I think that's the reason we're having that be able to work. So if you were considering building a bus engine, like I said, you're going to buy new heads, you can go the biggest, go right to the 2021. If you're going to buy, you got old used heads, okay, you're going to have to stay with like a 1904, which is fine. The 1904 pulls a bus so much better than a 1600. Really does. I got several friends with 1904s in their buses, but now I'm kind of going, wow, you know what? With new heads, man, you could go to the 76 and still about the same amount of work, put it together and put it in a bus and get even more torque. Again, like I said, the bigger the engine, the more the torque, the better it's going to pull it down the road. And it's just easy to get the horsepower down low with a bigger engine. Now, so again, you know, the options are you can go bigger. You know, you can go to the 76. The 74 is great. You know, I love 74s. I love 76s. Again, I will shy away from the 69 on almost any rebuild unless I just have a bunch of good used parts. Like I'm going to put this one together pretty soon. It's going to be an 1835. I would not normally build an 1835 other than the fact that this is a 40 horse case. Okay, and I'm kind of limited on how big I can go with it because these things are kind of thin. Okay, so I don't want to build a really big engine with this thing because it's a 40 horse case. So, you know, these are things that I'm always thinking about. Well, because it's thin here. It's right here. Right here, it's very thin. 1600 has a lot more meat there. Okay, so building an 1835 is to me a good engine still with a 40 horse case. It'll run really nice. You know, I can put single port heads on it, dual port heads on it. Just don't cram a whole bunch of RPMs in it, and it'll run great. You know, you get 5,000, 5,500 RPMs on this thing, and it's going to run beautiful. And that's enough power to have a lot of fun in a Beetle, or even in a bus. You can get down the road, you know, pretty well. But like if you really want to make that engine the best you can make it, the bigger engine is going to be better because of the torque you get at torque creates horsepower. Okay, but torque is basically, if you reverse the formula, torque is horsepower at low RPMs. That's what it is. All right. the formula turns around. You take torque and you turn it into horsepower. That's what, but everything's rated by horsepower. So if you look at engine ratings, people go, oh, it's 95 horse. Okay. And well, what RPMs? Oh, it's 6,800, But if it's 95 horse at 4,200, that's a lot more torque. Okay. And so it's easier to think about from a horsepower standpoint, because that's what everybody talks about with engines. They talk about, oh, I got a lot of horsepower. They don't say I have a lot of torque. Nobody puts their torque numbers up. It's not something you usually do. So if you just remember the torque, if you reverse the formula, equals horsepower at low RPMs. That's going to help you. And that's what you're trying to do, get that torque number up as high as you can with your bus engine build. And that's going to give you the best thing. The best way to do that is engine size. Another way is compression ratio. Another way is, but you don't want to go too much compression because you start creating heat. Another way is to do flow, okay, at lower RPMs. And more air and fuel. Well, how do you do that? Dual port heads. Single port heads have less air and fuel at low RPMs. But the ratio is better. So guys will say they have more torque. They don't really have more torque. It's just, if you want that look of a single port, that's great. You can use them, but you're going to be limited on the engine size you can go with too. Well, you can try the 2007 thing if you want to do it, but it's not something I would do, because you end up with that too much barrel fire. Because the bigger engine you go with, you're going to need more combustion chamber to make the compression ratio low enough. You don't want that 9-to-1 or 10-to-1 engine. You want a 8 1/4 target, okay, with all those 8 1/4, maybe even 8 1/2. If you stay in those range, and then you use the doghouse fan shroud and you full flow the case, even if you go up to 8 1/2, it will run fine, okay. But if you start to go to 9-to-1, that's when you're going to have those hill climb issues, or climbing hills, and as she starts to get hot, things like that, it's just things you want to stay away from in a bus. All right. So I hope that helps you out. Maybe that gives you a few more things. I kind of put little bits and pieces in every one of these, and I forget things later. And so I want to try and, have several of these videos out there so that you guys can put all the pieces together and come up with the best information. All right. I'll talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.